It was released in 2018. But today we're here to talk to him about his new book, Learn Hopefulness, The Power of Positivity to Overcome Depression. Welcome, Dan. Good to have you join me today.
Oh, John, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here at Psych Central. I'm with you. A real pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me, what got you interested in writing about hope? What is hope?
Well, it's kind of an interesting thing for me. I went through a really rough time about 10 years ago or so, and one of the things that happened was I was getting depressed, and something had happened in my life, and I felt that I had all these tools as a psychologist, all these things that I was exposed to and knew about, and interventions and things like that. But to be really honest, none of them were working. And a friend of mine was a positivist, and that was the beginning of the movement, really. And he was saying, you should check this stuff that Marty Seligman has out at UPenn. And when you're miserable and you're not feeling good, you're like, no, thank you. I'd rather stay miserable for as long as I can. So, but he didn't pay attention to me, got me tickets to the conference when we went. And I was stunned. I was originally trained as a researcher. And my goodness, I said, if even a small portion of what these folks have is true, we're on the dawn of something amazing. And so I started to use just some of the very basic techniques. And the history of psychology has been to only ameliorate suffering. And now these were techniques to enhance well-being and joy. And 3 or 4 weeks went by of me using these techniques, and it was the first time in about a year I felt better. And as a psychologist and working with lots of people, I thought, my goodness, I better go learn about this. And so I went back to school. I went back to UPenn and joined the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology program and started working with Marty and James Pawelski and then all the faculty there. And in that year, I learned stuff that just blew me away. And one of the things that really captured my attention was hope, because hope is the only positive emotion that requires negativity or uncertainty to be activated. And I thought, wow, now that's something to study. And so that kind of got me warmed up and interested in learning more about
it. That's really interesting to think about. That it was hope that got you interested. Because when you start talking about positive psychology, there's so many different areas that people focus on. And for you, it was this idea of hope. And what is hope? We all use the word, but I think psychologists define it a little bit more directly than maybe everyday people do.
Yeah, I think that was part of it. Finding out that it was unique among the positive emotions thing, and then also to understand that there was a more specific definition that they had. As an example, if we look at hope, optimism, and faith, right? We kind of use them all the same, but when the researchers go in to study it, they have very different criteria. So for something like hope, it's our belief that we can control something in the future. So it's our expectation that we're going to be able to manage or control something in the future that gives us hope. And when we don't believe we can do that, when we don't believe that we can control something in the future, that's when we become helpless and hopeless. We feel as if whatever it is we do doesn't matter. Whereas optimism is just much more generalized. It's like, I think tomorrow is going to be better. I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be better. That's very different than to say, I can make tomorrow better. So that's a big distinction. And then when we get into the specifics of faith, we realize faith is when something else, a higher power, a spiritual entity, something greater than us is going to have influence on the future. So hope is really what it is that we can do. Optimism is the the perspective that something good's going to happen. But then faith is when we have to let go and recognize that something greater than us is going to have that impact.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
When I think of hope, I think of hopeful people, what you call high hope people, that there are people in this world who view the world from a hopeful perspective, and then there are those that don't. Yet in the book, you suggest that anyone can be hopeful and can change their perspective. I'd like
Yeah.
to learn more about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, that was the thing. I started to take a look at all the different research on hope, and what I was kind of surprised by is that the hope researchers didn't necessarily study one another. Everybody was in their own little silo. So the medical people weren't really looking at the social psych. The social psych weren't looking at the clinical folks, and they weren't looking at the business people. So I decided to try and look at all the different theories and all the research all at once. And I asked a question then about what if they were all right? What if they each had a piece of the elephant, as they say? There's a parable about the three blind men who hold on to the elephant. And one grabs the tail and says the elephant looks like a rope. One grabs the leg and says it looks like a tree. And the other one grabs the ear and says it looks like a bird. Well, the truth of the matter is if we only looked at what each researcher was finding, we would get this kind of distorted version. But when I stepped back and I started to see that they all had a piece of the puzzle, then I realized that the high hope people, there were parameters. It didn't matter if we were talking about medicine or business or clinical psychology, that the high hope people had a pattern of decisions that they made about their life and their belief system that were very different than people with low hope. And so I started to study them. So as an example, people with high hope, when they're confronted with a difficulty, they see it as a challenge or as an opportunity, whereas low hope people are focused on what they can't do. High hope people are focused on possibilities, what they can do. The next thing is that high hope people tend to focus on what's good in the world or in their life or in their future, whereas low hope people ruminate about what's not so good or what weighs them down. The high hope people cultivate positivity, and what that means is that they spend time having gratitude. They spend time being kind to other people, so that they're constantly immersed in positive emotions. One of the things I use in the book is this idea that negative emotions are like pebbles, and positive emotions are like feathers. So the question is, can the feathers outweigh the pebbles? Absolutely they can, but you need a lot of them. And what we find out is that high hope people are constantly looking for these good things. They use their strengths. They use this technique that I call the micro goal. They recalibrate. So if you think you're going to reach a certain goal and you miss that goal, the low hope people use that experience of saying, well, I missed my mark. I guess nothing's going to work out for me. High hope people just recalibrate. They said, yeah, I wanted to run an 8-minute mile. I ran an 8.5-minute mile. Let me now shoot for an 8:20. So they recalibrate their goals, and that seems to be very helpful. They also seem to have a very strong sense of purpose or calling in life, and they absolutely cherish relationships. So these are some of the differences between high hope and low hope folks.
That's fascinating. I never realized that there were those kinds of differences in perception amongst people so much, because I think if you fall squarely into one of those two groups, you don't probably give the other group too much thought. But I think that's really one of the messages of your entire book, is that that people can change, these perceptions. You have a quote from the Talmud in the book. We don't see things as they are; we see them as we are. And talking about how our perception of the world colors everything we think and do. how does a person open themselves to changing those perceptions and to seeing more possibilities in life?
One of the things I have in the book are a series of exercises to help people, and one of the very first ones that I'd like to share with folks now is just having you do a review of yesterday. So one of the first things I'll ask people to do, and I usually do this in conferences or classes, I'll say, just write down everything you did yesterday. And so if people are listening now and you were to make a list of that, and it's your to-done list, this is yesterday. So it's like, well, I got up and I took a shower and I made breakfast, I ate coffee. You would make that list. And what you would notice about that list is that there's not a lot of emotion connected to it. Our perception of yesterday is rather formulaic. It's a series, a string of things to do. Our work in the brain, looking at things. It's just looking at what we did, with not a lot of emotion connected to it. But if then I ask people to look through the lens of gratitude to yesterday and pick 3 things that you have gratitude for, what starts to happen is that your brain changes in the way of looking at the world. It's looking at the exact same amount of time, maybe even at the same list. But more times than not, when I ask people to look at that same timeline and highlight 3 things that they have gratitude for, they're surprised to find things that didn't even make that list of things they did. It just got overshadowed by the volume or overshadowed by the negativity. When we look at the day before and highlight the gratitude, it's like we're harvesting a positive emotion that is already inside of us. And that I became really fascinated with, because a lot of people are like, well, I don't have anything, they're in this negative space. But the truth is, if we look backward first, we can harvest these positive emotions and bring them forward. So now that emotion yesterday gets highlighted, it gets expanded, it gets brought into the moment. And the research shows that when we do that, our perspective on the next 2 weeks will be slightly more optimistic. So now that we've been able to demonstrate, you can shift your perception in a matter of minutes just by focusing on the good things that have already taken place.
Yeah, I started keeping gratitude lists a few years back, and I find them incredibly helpful to to help put things in perspective. I used to do them more regularly, but absolutely, I think they're a valuable tool that too many people don't know about. Don't know the power and of gratitude and keeping track of something like that. Are there other ways that a person can make hope more of a everyday habit? Because I
Absolutely.
know you talk about making hope an everyday habit in the book. So
Yeah, absolutely. A way to think about it, I have this thing, a 21-day hope challenge, where there are 7 interventions from the past, 7 for the present, and 7 for the future. So if you were to look at that chart in some way of 7, 7, and 7, we recognize that there are elements from our past that we haven't fully taken advantage of. So just giving you an instance of that with the gratitude, that it's like, okay, if we can go back and look at the things that have happened that we appreciate and can harvest that emotion, we can bring that forward. But there are also things from the past that keep us stuck. So learning how to forgive, one of the things from the past is that people carry this unforgiveness with them going forward. And many times the people that they are carrying that unforgiveness with have passed on, or they're no longer in their life, but they're still carrying that anger. So there are things that can block our positivity from the past and things that can enhance it. So learning how to explore that and use that. Then there are things in the present, and one of the things I've really been fascinated with is what's called dispositional mindfulness. So we all have heard about mindfulness meditation. But this is a sitting
Mhm.
practice, right? Where you have to stop what you're doing, sit for 20 minutes, and all the value that comes from that is so rich. But there's another way to use mindfulness that brings us very much into the moment. So learning how to catch yourself thinking. And to notice what you notice, and to pay attention to the little surprises that are happening in the moment in our life, allow us to again be present with ourselves and our moment, and that tends to be a very powerful way to start cultivating positivity. And along with that, kindness is like the maybe the biggest bang we can get for the buck. If I do something kind for someone else, not only do I feel good and the person feel good, but through a phenomenon known as elevation, anybody watching that feels good. It changes our vagal tone. So doing acts of kindness, being mindful in the moment, are ways of taking care of the past, the present, and then with the future, setting a positive intention. A lot of work I do now, and you probably read about it in the book, has to do with a future self, like imaging a future self. And there's a lot of good work in physics and in psychology about having a positive image of something that you'd like to attain, that you have an intention toward becoming, moves us into the future. So we have interventions from the past, things like gratitude and dealing with forgiveness, things in the present like positional mindfulness and kindness, and things for the future like positive intention and imaging a best possible self, tend to be really well-researched things that help people stay in a high hope space.
Mhm. That makes a lot of sense. You have a whole chapter devoted to focusing on strengths, and
Yeah,
I know a lot of people struggle with that. It's easy to see the positives in other people and your friends and family members, but when you think about yourselves, a lot of people struggle with their own self-esteem and recognizing or even being able to identify any strengths in their life. What kinds of things do you recommend that people do to identify those strengths, to recognize that they do have strengths? Everybody does, and even if you're not used to doing that.
yeah. I think it's been the greatest advance in psychology, maybe since it began as a science, the understanding of character strengths. And a lot of that work came right out of UPenn. Angela Duckworth and Marty Seligman have really done some incredibly heavy lifting in terms of like getting them on board. So character strengths have to do with the virtues we have as human beings. So there's 24 of them that they've identified that are universal. Every known culture honors these particular strengths. And so when you look at things like creativity or gratitude or humor or spirituality or perseverance, these are all character strengths. What makes them unique is that they are not intelligence and they are not skill based. They are traits, they're human traits. And what they find out is that a prediction of somebody's success in the future has more to do with looking at their characterological well-being, their character, rather than their intelligence or their skill. So there's a quote I used in the book from Steve Martin, who said, "Thank God that persistence makes up for skill," because when you read his story and you learn, he just kept trying and trying. So as we shift to understanding the character that people have, we start to find out that we have something known as signature strengths. And the signature strengths are maybe our top 5 or 6 strengths out of these 24. And if you go to viacharacter.org, you'll be able to take that survey for free. That's viacharacter.org. And you'll learn about your strengths. And I'll just say this, John, when I was a student and studying this stuff, 10 years ago or so, I thought this was just total fluff. I was like, oh my God, I've taken every personality and IQ test or whatever. So I'm going to take this survey. And what I'm going to learn is what I already know about myself. Yeah, these are my strengths. How valuable is that going to be? But so I didn't have a good attitude. I wasn't high hope then. But what I learned is that if I just use those strengths, I stopped worrying about what I'm not good at. I stopped trying to improve the bottom ones or the thing, like that. But I just focus on being authentically who I am and learning how to use those strengths and characteristics in every possible situation. What starts to happen is I lose my anxiety about how to be in any situation. It's like I've discovered I have this great recipe for potato salad. Now, you might not like my potato salad, but this is what I'm bringing to the party. Some people like it, some people won't like it. But once you learn your strengths, it's like, this is what I'm bringing to the party. And that is cool. So, my top strengths are things like creativity, humor, perspective, perseverance, and gratitude. Most people listening to this may not know me, but they might get a little sense from this after hearing this, that, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. Well, now it doesn't matter if I'm here, if I'm at home, if I'm walking or being with friends. This is who I'm going to be. And what that does is it puts me in flow more often. And if I'm in flow more often, meaning that I'm not carrying a lot of drag, I'm not worrying about how I should be or might be or could be, or some trait of mine that, isn't quite in the top category there. If I just focus on being these things, life gets a lot easier, and you also find that people get attracted to that. They're warmed up by that authenticity because it resonates authenticity in them. Then they want to learn what their strengths are, and the combination of strengths is greater than the number of people on the planet. So yours are going to be different than mine, than the next person, and learning how to express yours and identify them in others becomes really a powerful trait, a powerful thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think too many people aren't aware of the character strengths survey, and I think it's great that you highlight that and talk about it in the book as well as today. Definitely check that out. There's, and this is a great time for people to spend some time focusing on themselves. I don't usually find a lot new in a lot of self-help books, right? Because a lot of the things that people talk about are things that people have been talking about for decades. I did find some new stuff in your book, and I really appreciated that. During this time of the pandemic, I wonder, is there something that hope can teach us about how to better cope with the feelings of social isolation and other things that a lot of people are feeling due to the physical distancing and the stay-at-home orders and just fear about contracting the virus and whatnot?
Yeah, I've been getting that question a lot, John. So thank you for asking it. I think there are 3 incredibly important things right now, for a whole bunch of reasons. Not the least of which is the fact that every day we're exposed to new information, new set of rules. In the last 100 days of the pandemic, I don't think any day has gone by where something that the previous day hadn't been altered in some way, shape, or form. So it means that our capacity for having hope needs to be constantly recalibrated. And so the first thing I would say to people is to get comfortable with the idea of recalibrating your goal, so that whatever your plan is in the morning, know that it's okay to tweak it and to recalibrate it. And more importantly than that, to have recalibrated goals that have a beginning, middle, and end. That these micro goals might only take 20 minutes. So if I know I have 20 minutes or a half an hour, I'll think, well, geez, I got 400 things to do, but you know what I'm going to do during this time? I am going to return these 3 emails, or make lunch, or finish cleaning out this desk. Because when I can shrink the goal that's out here into a little more tangible, that recalibration gives me tread. It literally gives me hope, because now I can control my immediate future. It's the belief that we can control it. I might not know what I can control in 2 weeks, but I know in the next 20 minutes, I can get these 3 emails out. So recalibration would be the first thing. The second thing I would say is, and we've already talked about 2 of the 3 of these things, is to express gratitude whenever you can, to do a gratitude review daily, so that you're starting to harvest these positive emotions that have already taken place. And the one thing that we didn't talk about with that is having self-compassion, to recognize none of us are going to get this exactly right. We're going to do the best we can. And to have some solace with the fact that if you can have compassion for yourself during this process and sort of be kind to you, not to get too corny about the whole thing, but to have compassion for yourself, you're going to be able to have compassion for others. I actually have on the bottom of my homepage on dantomasulo.com, on the bottom of the homepage, there's a 2-minute self-compassion exercise that I've done some research and has gotten some attention, that has been helpful for people to have that compassion. And then the final thing that I'd say is to cherish your relationships. One of the things that's happening now is to recognize that if it's a Zoom call, people having get-togethers over Zoom, birthday parties or whatever, maintain the vibrancy of your relationships, because we might be in isolation, but that doesn't mean we have to be alone. It means that we might have to have unique ways of doing that. Some of the ways that I've recommended are to reach out to former teachers and people that have been instrumental in your life for helping you get where you are. Just send them an email, send them a note about that. With your family and friends, make sure you're staying connected. My grandson was just a year old, and I'm watching him grow up on Zoom. It's just, but we make the connection. He knows my voice. He knows my face. It's lovely. It's lovely. So those are the 3 things: to recalibrate, express the kindness, gratitude, and compassion for yourself and others, and then to cherish relationships.
Exactly. I find that people forget, like, that we have all this great technology that we can use to remain socially connected with each other. That the whole term socially distant is so wrong. It's physically distant. We need to maintain that physical distance, not socially. Socially, we need to definitely do as much as we can to keep those connections with each other alive and thriving. So.
One of the groups I work for did change that. When we meet, they say physically distant, socially connected. And I thought, yep, that's it. That's it exactly.
That's entirely it. That's it, 100%. So, Dr. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. If there was one thing that you really wanted people to take away from our discussion about hope and learned hopefulness, what would that one thing be?
To see adversity as a challenge or an opportunity and to ask yourself, what is it I can do in this circumstance that would bring me some control? And even more basic than that, if something really seems dismal and you're stuck with that, to say there's another way of looking at this, and that'll help your brain start to think about it in a slightly different way.
Agreed. I think that's great advice, and I really hope that people check out the book. You can do so at Amazon.com. The book's name is Learned Hopefulness: The Power of Positivity to Overcome Depression. We've been speaking with Dr. Dan Tomasulo today. I thank you so much for your time and joining us today. I really enjoyed the book, and I hope people check it out.
Thank you so much, John. Very much appreciated.